Near the end of August 2010, a secret meeting was held between Sir John Sawyers, chief of MI6, Britain's Secret Intelligence Service, and Sir Paul Stevenson, head of London's Metropolitan Police Service. The two met in absolute secrecy in a dining room in the headquarters of MI6 at Vauxhall Cross. They meet only hours after the naked, decomposing body of an MI6 codebreaker, Gareth Williams, was found stuffed inside a padlocked sports bag. The meeting was organized by the chief of MI6 because he wanted to sought assurances from Sir Paul that his police officers wouldn't meddle too much into the sensitive secret work of Agent Williams. This is the story of how one murder investigation turned into one of the most intriguing unsolved mysteries in British history. It is August 11th, 2010. Gareth Williams returns home to Britain from a trip to the west coast of the United States. The trip was a combination of vacation and work, as one of the reasons he traveled to the United States was to attend the annual DEF CON convention held in Las Vegas, Nevada. DEF CON is a hacker convention that every year gathers computer security professionals, journalists, lawyers, government employees, security researchers, and others interested in the mysterious world of computer hacking. Gareth Williams was no stranger to DEF CON. In fact, given his background, it's hard to say whether his visit was more work or pleasure. Gareth Williams was a skilled mathematician. He was born on September 26, 1978, in Valley, Wales. From a young age, he was regarded as an exceptionally talented prodigy. His secondary school teacher once said, quote, "If you explained something once to Gareth, he remembered it. You didn't have to explain it again." End quote. Gareth graduated with a first-class degree in mathematics from Bangor University at the age of just 17. Having began his university studies while still in secondary school. His math teacher at the time said, quote, "He was the best logician with the fastest brain I have ever met," end quote. Although reportedly a very isolated individual, perhaps due to his intellectual superiority over his peers, Gareth excelled not only in mathematics and computer science, but also in sports. By the time he was 17, he had followed his father into competitive cycling. In 1997, at the age of 18, Gareth left his home in Wales to begin a PhD program at Manchester University, which he eventually completed. His PhD thesis was entitled Methods for Global Illumination Models, in which he examined how light and shade could be replicated in computer games. Video games had always been a private passion of Gareth's, and although online gaming was still relatively in its infancy in the late 1990s, he reportedly earned an online reputation as an unbeatable gamer. Because of all this, at the age of 21, Gareth Williams was approached by the British intelligence community. The university believed that he had caught their attention not only because of his excellent mathematical and computer science skills, but also due to his advanced online gaming abilities. And thus, Gareth Williams began his career at GCHQ's Listening Center in Cheltenham. GCHQ, short for Government Communications Headquarters, is Britain's intelligence and security organization responsible for providing signals intelligence and information assurance to the government and the armed forces of the United Kingdom. Providing signals essentially means intercepting communication, whether between people or in the form of electronic signals not directly used for communication. Due to the secretive nature of GCHQ, it is difficult to pinpoint exactly what Gareth's duties were. He was reportedly a middle-ranking, desk-bound technician gathering intelligence data and deciphering signals between individuals and groups considered threats to national security. Essentially, he was a codebreaker. Specifically, although details are scarce, His early work at GCHQ reportedly included intercepting emails and phone calls between Islamic radicals and Middle Eastern agents, as well as suspected Russian spy cells. In fact, a former GCHQ contractor stated that Williams had been obsessed with the case, methodology, and characters of the so-called illegals program, a case that made headlines in June of 2010 when a network of 10 Russian sleeper agents were arrested in the United States and accused of being part of an espionage ring, some of whom had previously lived in the United Kingdom. However, his desk-bound role at GCHQ was soon replaced by a much more challenging assignment as an operative. In 2009, he was seconded from GCHQ to the Secret Intelligence Service, commonly known as MI6. A secondment is a temporary assignment. MI6, short for Military Intelligence Section 6, is the crème de la crème of the British intelligence community. It is the UK's foreign intelligence service, primarily tasked with covert overseas collection and analysis of human intelligence concerning foreign nationals. It is also famously the home of Bond, James Bond. Fast forward 1 year to the beginning of our story. It is August 11, 2010. Gareth has just returned from his DEF CON conference in the United States, and he is still temporarily assigned to the MI6. On that same day, August 11th, he spoke by phone with his sister, Carrie. He mentioned that he was tidying up his London apartment because he planned to return to GCHQ in Cheltenham on September 3rd, 2010, as his 1-year secondment at MI6 was nearing its end. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary in Gareth's life. However, a week after their last conversation, Carrie called her brother again, but this time there was no answer. She repeatedly tried to reach him with no success. This was strange to Carrie because Gareth was always punctual, like a Swiss watch. If he had seen so many missed calls, he would have already picked up. Worried, Carrie contacted GCHQ on August 23rd at 11:30 a.m. in the morning. That same day, in the afternoon, uniformed police officers were sent to check on Gareth after his sister and subsequently colleagues expressed concerns over his disappearance. At the time, Gareth Williams lived at 36 Alderney Street in Pimlico, London, in a flat reportedly used by MI6 as a safe house for their staff. The flat was just a few hundred meters away from the MI6 headquarters at Vauxhall Cross. At approximately 4:48 p.m., uniformed police officers gained entry to Gareth Williams' top-floor apartment. Inside, they found a dark room with the curtains drawn. The apartment was extremely neat and tidy. 2 iPhones, a couple of SIM cards, and an Apple notebook were lying on the table. Nothing seemed out of place until they entered the bathroom. There, in the bathtub, was a red padlocked hold-all bag. Due to the odor and the red liquid seeping from the bag, the officers decided to cut it open near the padlock. Inside, they found the naked, decomposing body of Agent Gareth Williams. His body was contorted in such a way that the officers initially thought his arms and legs had been severed. They immediately declared the premises a crime scene and radioed for assistance. Given the secretive nature of his work, Williams's death set off alarms across London. Alderney Street was cordoned off as authorities began processing the scene. Soon, the flat was swarming with government agents, MI5, detectives from Homicide and Serious Crime Command, and members of Scotland Yard's Counter-Terrorism Command, SO15. After the aforementioned agencies departed, it was up to the Metropolitan Police's murder squad to study the evidence. The investigation, dubbed Operation Finlayson, attracted widespread public and media attention. Before we dive into the crime scene and the investigation, I need to briefly revisit something I mentioned in the introduction of my video. and that is the secret meeting held just hours after Gareth's body was found between the heads of MI6 and the Metropolitan Police. What I didn't mention earlier is that through his MI6 secondment, Gareth Williams had also worked alongside the United States' National Security Agency and the FBI. Keeping the details of this case under wraps and preventing the police from probing too deeply into his work was not only in the interest of MI6, but also American government agencies. In fact, the United States State Department requested that the British authorities ensure no details of Williams's work would emerge during the official investigation. Following this request, then British Foreign Secretary William Hague signed a public interest immunity certificate authorizing the withholding of details about Williams's work and joint operations with the United States. This secretive meeting left the public speculating about the exact nature of Gareth Williams' work at MI6. Two sources with direct knowledge of the case revealed that some of his work had focused on Russia, and one confirmed report stated that he had been assisting the NSA in tracing international money laundering routes used by organized crime groups, including Moscow-based mafia cells. Williams's date of death was estimated to be in the early hours of August 16th, 1 week before his naked, decomposing body was discovered on August 23rd. He was found stuffed inside a red hold-all bag that had been padlocked from the outside. Key to the padlock, however, was found inside the bag underneath Gareth Williams's body. Some have speculated that he may have locked himself inside the bag for some reason. Yet, as the investigation reports continued, I found that theory hard to believe. Why? Well, because perhaps the most intriguing detail of the investigation is that the only DNA evidence found at the crime scene were fragmented traces on the bag and Gareth's hand, belonging to an unidentified person or persons. Just traces, I repeat. No other DNA evidence, fingerprints, footprints, or palm prints were found on the bathtub or anywhere else in the apartment. Notably, this also includes no fingerprints of Gareth Williams himself on the bag or the bath. No signs of forced entry were found, though it was noted that for some unknown reason, the door and locks had been removed by the time police experts became involved, presumably by some other agency. One of the more unsettling discoveries by investigators was that the temperature in Gareth's apartment had been turned up. Considering it was a warm August day, there seemed no need to increase the temperature in the apartment, unless someone wanted to accelerate the decomposition of the body. If that was the intention, they were indeed successful. Because of the degree of decomposition, the initial toxicology tests came back inconclusive. There were no visible signs of injuries or any clear indication that Gareth had been involved in a struggle. However, this is also somewhat inconclusive, because as the body decomposes, soft tissues break down first, making it harder, or sometimes even impossible, to identify certain injuries. One significant discovery, however, was that one of the few DNA fragments found belonged to a scientist working for a forensic company that had examined the body. This led Scotland Yard to spend more than a year chasing a non-existent suspect. No definitive cause of death was determined. Despite the inconclusive results, coroner Dr. Fiona Wilcox concluded in her final report that Gareth's death was, quote, unnatural and likely to have been criminally mediated, end quote. She also stated that the absence of hand and footprints in the bathroom was significant. Dr. Wilcox was satisfied that a third party had placed Gareth's body in the bag and, on a balance of probability, padlocked it shut. She further suggested that Gareth was likely alive when placed in the bag and probably died shortly afterward from CO2 poisoning or short-acting poison. There are two main theories about what actually happened to Gareth Williams. Both theories, in my opinion, have numerous holes and inconsistencies, and frankly, seem like something from an M. Night Shyamalan movie. Regardless, let's start with the first theory, which wasn't supported by the coroner but was backed by the Metropolitan Police, and that is that Gareth Williams' death was an accident resulting from either an autoerotic sexual act or an escapology attempt gone wrong. A few months into the investigation, tabloid press began publishing what members of Williams' family described as a smear campaign against Gareth. They falsely reported that the flat contained cocaine, and paraphernalia. Also, that Gareth was a cross-dresser and that he occasionally paid male escorts for sex. These claims were refuted by the detectives. However, the police did confirm to the public that Gareth had occasionally visited bondage websites and searched for bondage training videos on YouTube. Additionally, upon examining his apartment, the police found high-end women's clothing valued between £15,000 and £25,000, along with some wigs and makeup. Also, a video footage on one of his phones showed him posing naked, except for leather boots, and he had also apparently visited a drag show a few days before his death. Even more intriguing, Gareth's landlady, who rented him his apartment in Cheltenham for 10 years, recalled an incident that occurred 3 years before his death. She and her husband had found him shouting for help in his apartment because he tied his hands to the bedpost and was unable to free himself. Gareth explained to them that he was testing whether he could escape or not, but they suspected it was something more sexual than him trying to be Houdini. Despite this, his landlords described him as a clean and quiet tenant. However, all of this information fueled speculation that Gareth Williams died due to an accident, whether sexual in nature or part of some escapology stunt. Some even suggested that it was the result of games gone wrong involving a third party. This theory, that Gareth died by accident, was somewhat supported by the police. Despite the coroner's conclusion that his death was most likely unlawful, the Metropolitan Police, following a reinvestigation based on some new but largely unimportant leads, concluded otherwise. They suggest that the most probable scenario was that Gareth Williams locked himself inside the bag and died because he couldn't or wouldn't get out. However, the police could not fundamentally and beyond doubt rule out the possibility that a third party was involved in his death. I honestly find this theory unbelievable for several reasons. First, during the investigation, a couple of experts demonstrated that it would have been virtually impossible for Williams to lock himself in the bag. In fact, 2 experts attempted to lock themselves in a similar bag 400 times but were unsuccessful, although one expert admitted there was a slim chance Williams might have managed it. They emphasized that it was highly improbable. Furthermore, the coroner specifically rejected the notions of suicide, interest in bondage or cross-dressing, or autoerotic activity being involved in Williams' death. While it was true that Williams visited bondage websites, the coroner pointed out that these visits were intermittent and not frequent enough to suggest a strong or active interest. She also condemned leaks about cross-dressing, suggesting they were an attempt at media manipulation, aimed at generating sensational, click-hungry headlines. As for the high-end women's clothing found in his apartment, there was no definitive proof of their use. In fact, the police had discovered that Williams had attended an evening class in dress design and was fascinated by fashion, so it's possible that the clothing purchases were part of that interest. Additionally, a friend of Williams explained that the wigs found in his apartment were intended for a fancy dress party they had planned to attend together. In my opinion, the media's focus on designer clothing and wigs had more to do with driving clicks than offering any real insight. There was no substantial proof of what the clothes, wigs, and makeup was used for. Remember, Gareth was found naked inside the padlocked bag, so if this were part of a game, the clothing clearly wasn't used in it. Attending a drag show and visiting bondage websites isn't definitive proof of someone's sexual lifestyle either. For all we know, he may have stumbled into the drag show by chance, or maybe it was just entertaining. There doesn't necessarily need to be a sexual component to it. It's all pure speculation. And I'm not saying this because I'm naive or blind to obvious clues. Yes, if Gareth Williams was a regular citizen, I might give more weight to this speculation. But for heaven's sakes, he was an MI6 and GCHQ spy. In the clandestine world of espionage, what seems obvious might not have been. For all we know, the wigs, makeup and clothing could have been part of his job. Who knows? In conclusion, based on all the information available, it seems almost impossible that this was an accident. For those of you commenting online that his past of locking himself on the bedpost is a clear indication that he did it to himself, let me just say there's a long and incredible leap from a little kinky bed action to contorting yourself inside a bag, zipping it up from the inside, fastening the Velcro from the outside, and then padlocking it from within. I might acknowledge that possibility more if Gareth's fingerprints were all over the bathtub or the bag. But since the scene was essentially squeaky clean, this seems nearly impossible. Some have argued that certain agencies could have scrubbed the place clean, but that only makes the accident or suicide theory even less plausible. Why would they go to such lengths to clean the scene and remove the doorknobs if it were obviously an accident or suicide? That wouldn't make any sense. They'd only be incriminating themselves and turning a personal tragedy into a full-blown espionage conspiracy. Now, the second theory is that Gareth Williams was killed, and based on my research, this theory holds more weight than the accident theory. The only difference among proponents of this theory is whether the hit was carried out by some of his own colleagues or by someone else, primarily the Russians. I'll examine both possibilities. The main reason many believe MI6 was involved, or at least acted suspiciously, is that it took them a week to respond to the absence of one of their agents. Gareth Williams is believed to have died in the early hours of August 16th, but his body wasn't discovered by police until August 23rd. Considering that MI6 wanted to keep the inquiry into his work life to a minimum, it's clear that his work was of some importance to the MI6. So why wasn't his body discovered sooner? Why weren't protocols in place to check on an absent agent, especially one of his supposed significance? What's even more perplexing is that Gareth's sister Carrie contacted GCHQ at around 11:30 a.m. on August 23rd to express her concern that Gareth was missing. But the police weren't notified until 5 hours later at around 4:30 p.m. Why was there a 5-hour gap between her call and the police being informed? Even more puzzling, why did GCHQ, or rather MI6 at that point, contact the police instead of sending some of their own agents to check on Gareth at his supposedly safe house apartment? Imagine a scenario where James Bond's colleague goes missing, and instead of him taking immediate action, he calls the local police.
999, what's your emergency?
Blimey mate, Dave's gone missing, innit? Could you go check up on him?
You get the point. Also, GCHQ and MI6 have direct hotlines with the police, so why would they use 999, the UK's equivalent of 911? Adding fuel to this theory is that Gareth apparently couldn't wait to return to GCHQ from his secondment at MI6. He reportedly disliked the rat race, flashcar competitions, and post-work drinking culture at MI6. And as a keen cyclist and walker, he was eager to return to the countryside. Now, I'm unsure what to make of GCHQ's or MI6's involvement. Yes, all of these circumstances sound odd and suspicious, but at this point it's all speculation. This wasn't an ordinary investigation. It involved the death of a Secret Service spy. What may seem obvious to us could have a completely different context in the intelligence world. Even if it were all true, it doesn't directly prove malicious intent. Perhaps they had some legitimate national security reasons for acting the way they did. I'm not defending MI6 or accusing them. That's exactly the point. With the limited and fragmented information available, we're all just left guessing. Now the third and final theory, or rather the second part of the second theory, is that Gareth Williams was assassinated by a foreign hostile organization, specifically the Russians. Once again, there's been a lot of speculation surrounding the nature of his work. It's been suggested that he was tracking money laundering routes involving Russian mafia groups. However, much of this remains pure guesswork. The only source that added some credibility, although not definitive proof, came in late 2015. In September and October of that year, Boris Karpichkov, a former KGB double agent who defected to the United Kingdom, made some startling claims. He alleged that the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service, or SVR, was responsible for Williams's murder. According to Karpichkov, the SVR tried and failed to blackmail Williams into becoming a double agent, apparently using his supposed special interest as a leverage. During that unsuccessful endeavor by the Russians, Williams supposedly discovered the identity of a Russian mole inside GCHQ. Karpichkov claimed that this discovery forced the SVR to eliminate Williams to protect their mole. As for the cause of death, Karpichkov stated that the SVR killed Williams by an untraceable poison introduced into his ear. Now this theory seems somewhat more plausible than the others, largely because Russian agencies have a documented history of assassinating, or at least attempting to assassinate, individuals abroad. Notable examples include the lethal poisoning of former Russian agent Alexander Litvinenko in 2006 in London, and the poisoning of Sergei and Yulia Skripal in 2018 in Salisbury, UK. However, while attributing the killings to the Russians makes sense given their track record, this particular death seems out of character for their usual methods. Why go to the trouble of staging a perfect, untraceable crime with no DNA evidence, instead of simply poisoning Gareth in a more straightforward manner like they've done in previous cases? Also, why risk their operatives' identities by coming to his apartment, which was reportedly a safe house located only a few hundred meters from MI6 headquarters, when there were easier, less risky ways to eliminate him? All of these questions remained unanswered, and all of the theories remained open to debate. Gareth Williams' family has stated that they believe he was murdered by someone with expertise in the, quote, dark arts of the intelligence world, end of quote. The coroner ruled out accidental death, while the Metropolitan Police concluded it was likely an accident. And, meanwhile, a significant portion of the public is convinced his death was tied to his sexual interests. Ultimately, what really happened to the brilliant codebreaker Gareth Williams on that August day remains a mystery. Before you go, I would like to hear your opinions on what happened to Gareth Williams. I read all your comments and I'd love to hear your theories. Who knows, maybe some of you have a new, unique insight into the case. Also, if you like this video and want to support the channel, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe. It's a bargain actually, since it costs you nothing, and in return I'll bring you more content like this. Thank you for watching.